Hello, and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. And welcome, folks, to Conventions Week. Now, regular listeners to this podcast will know that throughout the election year, we are doing some special series that look at the regular features of an election year. So we've done stuff on the also-run candidates, to Veep stakes, to more. And now we have come to conventions. The RNC already had their convention, as you know. It was quite the affair. And the Democrats are in Chicago pretty late in the calendar year to formally nominate Kamala Harris and Tim Walz as their candidates. So we're going to talk about conventions. There's a lot to do this week. But the first thing I should say is, if you are listening to this, maybe you want to go watch this, because we're doing this as one of our video episodes that we do from time to time, putting it on the This Day YouTube channel. And so listeners, if you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel or go on YouTube, you can see our faces as we do this episode, or you can keep listening if you're listening in the good old podcast feed. But those faces, for those of you watching here, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kelly Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
And Kelly is wearing a This Day t-shirt. So
yes,
always repping
nice.
the merch.
It's very nice. I like that yellow. Always repping the merch. The merch is also available on our website. And maybe we'll sell some merch at our live show in Boston on the 13th of September. So lots of things to plug here as we get into Conventions Week. But yes, tickets for that live show are available right now on our website, thisdaypod.com. Okay. Here is what we're going to do for Conventions Week. We're going to run some stories in subsequent episodes that we've done about conventions. Obviously, we've talked about conventions a lot on this show, but you're not going to get a ton of sober analysis, I would say, in this episode about this convention. We want to basically just make a list and have some fun. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through 7 or so weird moments from conventions. Some of them we've touched on, some of them we've not. They're pretty silly, pretty random, but, you know, nomination conventions are kind of silly and kind of random. And we'll reflect a little bit on what it's like in the room, because I think they're a lot weirder than people realize. And so I think an episode where we say, let's pick some weird moments, actually is a pretty good way to capture what goes down at conventions. So you ready? You want to jump in with
let's go.
Weird moments? Okay, so I'm going to take weird moment number 1, which is the 1924 DNC in New York City. So we've touched on this before. We did an episode, actually, I think in our Also Ran series, about this guy, Al Smith, who was a perpetual candidate and didn't get the nomination in 1924, but had a huge influence in kind of reshaping the Democratic Party, moving it in a more progressive direction. This convention was a sort of, I'd say, moment in which a lot of those fractures were coming out. And I guess we should also remind folks that conventions really were, up until fairly recently, the place where, like, the party nominees would emerge. Kind of all the business was it wasn't a fait accompli. It was like kind of where stuff would actually get hashed out. And stuff got hashed out in 1924 in quite a dramatic fashion. It was the longest convention ever. There were 100+ ballots that eventually led to the nomination of this random guy, John Davis, who basically, like, Al Smith and another candidate, they're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and they can't, there's 100 ballots. And then they're finally like, well, how about this guy, John? John's like standing in the corner. He's like, wait, me? And they're like, yeah, John, how about you? And finally he sneaks through. But,
come on up.
It was a remarkable moment, you know, and happening in the heart of New York City.
Yeah, happening in the heart of New York City in the middle of summer, which also may have contributed to people finally, both people getting very, very stubborn, and then people deciding, oh my God, we have to decide on someone. We want to go somewhere that is not so hot. We don't want to be stuffed into this convention center. So I think that the weather had a little bit to play into it.
Heat wave to make you cranky and short-tempered. And you no longer give any F's. You're just done. It's just done. I think they're like, fine, John.
John Davis, that's a real person, sure.
Well, it was happening. It was over 100 degrees. It was in Madison Square Garden. And apparently the Barnum and Bailey Circus had just finished a run. And so the smell of that was still lingering in the air for people. So yes, very weird convention. The other thing we should mention before we move on is that also the KKK was there. As a major force. 20,000 Klan members show up in the heart of Manhattan and try and disrupt it. And, you know, John Meacham has kind of said, the historian John Meacham has said that actually 1924 is sort of the convention that most feels like it is analogous to, you know, what we're going through right now.
24. I mean, that's peak of Klan
Right.
membership.
Yeah,
They have like
but
over
in the
4
heart of New
million
York City
members.
is,
Yeah.
and then maybe this is a coincidence, maybe not, but 2 years later, they knocked down Madison Square Garden. Maybe
They're like, we can't get the vibes right in here anymore.
We're starting over.
All right, let's move on. Let's go to weird moment number 2, weird convention moment number 2.
Oh, man. So this one, I didn't realize just how much optics matter, because when you think about the first televised convention, this is 1948, people have not really seen how the sausage is made. And so for the first time, they're looking at this convention, the Democratic convention, no less. And they're like, yo, this is a circus. This is wild. It is packed full of people running all around. You have all of these people who are coming to speak to the podium that are not camera ready. You know, the cameras have lights shining on them. They're sweating. One commentator had forgotten to shave. He's got like a 5 o'clock shadow. It's like, what are you doing? Clean it up. Like, no one was ready for the cameras. And I just think that's hysterical to me. But there's one quote I think that's really good. They're talking about just like what it looked to see, how the audience was like so shocked to see how the convention took place. And they basically said that it looked like a mixed setting of a country circus, a street carnival, and a medicine show on a 4th of July picnic. And I was like, yeah, that about captures it all. People were also doing like weird antics too, like Congresswoman Claire Booth Luce, who wanted to talk about inflation. And so she brings like a carton of milk and a steak up to the stage and like waves the steak around to talk about like inflation. And it's like, what? Why does she have a steak? And then she leaves the steak on the podium.
The steak on the podium. Like, that's the best part. Yeah.
I like the idea of bringing props, but I also think that this captures, you know, a couple of things. One, I think we forget the idea of like how a person appears on television. There was no reference for it, right? People,
no social media
had TV in their phones or TVs in their homes, and so they just like there wasn't an aesthetic that people were preparing for, and so you get these kind of images that don't play very well on television. But the other thing is, I've been to one convention, the 2016 Republican National Convention, and if you're not at the convention, the thing that you miss out on is the weirdness, right? Like these are political devotees, and it is a carnival and a circus and a party all rolled into one, and people like kind of let their freak fly a little bit.
You know, my observation at the conventions I've been to, I think I've been to 4, maybe 5, but it's similar to what you said, which is like you're kind of surprised at how rough around the edges it is. But then with the modern conventions, you also then at the same time, these are a little sort of at odds, but you also realize how much of a TV product it is. And basically from like, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., it is just like totally ramshackle, all the scenes show, whatever. And then all of a sudden, especially with modern conventions, obviously we're talking about the first televised one here. They didn't have their act together, but now, oh my gosh, they have their act together. And it is so, you have this, you have to cover it as something that's being produced for TV, not being produced for the thousands of people in the audience in that arena. And there's this weird disconnect. And I remember one of the first, this is probably a really simple technique, but I mean, it kind of blew me away when the first time I saw it. But I think it was at the 2008 Democratic Convention. Hillary was giving a speech. Maybe, Obama gave a speech at the big stadium, but in the arena, Hillary was giving a speech. And during the speech, floods of interns or campaign workers would go into the audience and hand out signs throughout the speech. And so they'd hand out a sign that said promise or something. And then 2 minutes later, Hillary Clinton would have a line in her speech that evoked that word, and then they would be able to cut to the audience, and everyone's holding up signs that tied to.
Wow!
And then they would come and collect all the signs, and then hand out something else, that said "Jobs Now" or something, and it would be ready for the "Jobs Now" line a minute later. Super highly produced in that kind of.
That's
way.
So the performance of it all, the showmanship too, is just like I get it. You have to keep people entertained, because otherwise, I mean, a convention could be really boring. I mean, it could feel like a really long church service or something. Like, you want something that feels like you have people's attention. But at the same time, I think some of the antics, like when what is it? There's a woman named India Edwards who has like a hat box, and then opens it up and like a balloon rises and she's like, this is inflation. Like, and you see the balloon rising and you're like, really? Are we doing this? Like, is this going to get our attention? Like, some of the antics I think are a little bit over the top, but what are you going to do when you're trying to keep a room of tens of thousands of people sort of engaged in what you have to say?
The best prop, though, in 48 is the doves.
Oh, yes. I don't know whose idea this was. So this to me is just hilarious. Someone thought it would be a good idea to release a dove to represent every single state. At the time, it was 48 states, so 48 doves. And of course, these doves get released and they're flying all over the stadium. And people are like, oh my gosh. If you're like me, I'm terrified of birds. Like, I really don't like birds. I've been pooped on many times. It's just gross. And one of the newscasters is like, get those goddamn pigeons out of here.
Which, fair. I mean, it's not like they're out in the middle of a park.
Right. They're
in an enclosed space.
Yeah. I know. Someone's going to get pooped on. It's not a good look.
And this is, of course, where Truman is nominated. And so it's like right before Truman comes on, they release all these doves and everyone's just pissed about the doves. And then he has to.
Because how are you going to catch them?
Yeah,
how are you going to like put that back in the box? You can't do that.
The pigeons are hanging out up there with that one balloon that got released.
They're up in the rafters.
We'll talk about balloons in a minute because balloons obviously and balloon fiascos are a big part of the weird convention history. But let's move on to weird convention moment number 3.
Yes. Speaking of conventions that might have smelled a little weird, 1968, the DNC in Chicago, it is something that people have talked about ad nauseum since it happened. It's much more famous for the police violence, for the fractures in the Democratic Party. But there were other more, let's say, weirder things going on at the DNC in 1968. And one of those was the nominee of the Youth International Party, the Yippies, who nominated Pegasus as their candidate for president. And Pegasus, as his name suggests, was a pig. And it was part of this kind of performance art protest that the Yippies were doing. I mean, this is actually kind of big in the symbolic politics of the late 1960s, that part of criticizing the system was to point out the ridiculousness of it. And so this idea of nominating a pig to be the candidate, but like there's nothing in the rule book that says that a pig can't be president.
So,
and for people, go ahead.
Yeah, no, are you going to talk about the Yippies? Or?
Yeah, well, I mean, there is this kind of like bigger political story in which this is happening. Because the Yippies were people, you'll probably recognize their names, people like Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin. Pegasus was purchased by a Yippie by the name of Phil Oakes. You might recognize him as the folk singer who brought us Love Me, I'm Liberal, among a number of other songs. But these guys would end up getting arrested, originally called the Chicago 8, and then demoted down to the Chicago 7. These are 7 activists who are put on trial for their activism around the 1968 campaign, for conspiracy, all of these different things. Nothing related to the pig, fortunately, but they were put on trial and ultimately all found not guilty by a jury.
And there is a little controversy. So I think it's actually the other night I couldn't sleep and I just was like, oh, I guess I'll watch something and fall asleep. And I opened Netflix and the first thing that popped up was that movie, The Trials, the Chicago 7, which is solid. Aaron Sorkin. Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah.
I actually fell back asleep before I could see if Pegasus makes an appearance, but it does a very good job of painting the various strands along the left of the Yippies, who are much more in that sort of merry prankster, street art performance, and then the much more serious-minded SDS activists. And so they were all swirling around in Chicago around this time, inside the arena and out. They nominate this pig. Pegasus the Immortal is his name, which is important to keep in mind.
I forgot his title. I'm sorry. His honorific.
What happens to Pegasus? There is this nice little rabbit hole, a pig burrow that you can go down of. It's unclear whether any of the for a while, I think there were rumors that some of the charges against the Chicago 7 did involve the pig, like transporting a live animal into the city of Chicago or something.
Oh my gosh.
I don't think that was ever formally part of it, but the pig was certainly part of the issue. Like when they arrested everyone, they had to figure out what to do with the pig. And there were rumors that a police officer ate him.
Oh gosh.
Yes.
Yeah. So it is not clear what happened to Pegasus. He was probably taken to a farm somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
let's say, yes, he was taken to a farm upstate. And
Yeah.
let's just leave it at that.
Yeah. There you
Oh,
go.
man. It just kind of, I mean, the mocking and the poking fun of sort of like jokes on you. You know, we can't take you seriously. So we're going to nominate a pig is really what the dig is all about.
Yeah.
And Nixon ultimately wins that election, and the Yippies hold an inauguration to inaugurate Pegasus, even though he had taken off for parts unknown.
Yeah.
Love it.
All right. Well, let's move on from Pegasus to weird convention moment number 4. Let's go to 1996. We're roughly going in chronological order here. 1996, and this is when the Democrats dance the Macarena. So I think a lot of people, this still sort of lives in that. It's in a meme right now, right? I mean, the video gets trotted out all the time. Obviously, it's Hillary Clinton. I think people are seeing that pop into their head, Hillary Clinton dancing the Macarena. Well, first, let's start with the meme, actually. Do you think that it is a lovable meme, or do you think it's used to sort of mock Clinton in a unfair way?
I kind of think it's both.
Yeah. I think it's corny. And that's part of the reason why it gets circulated. But it's also, I mean, it is kind of making fun of like the unhip Democratic Party.
Yes.
And at the same time, like, it's so unhip that it kind of comes back around to, like, look at these guys.
Yeah.
I think it's hilarious because it's like, for me, like, dancing is so enjoyable and so much fun. And there's so much like hilarity that goes along with dancing too. Like, maybe it's because I'm thinking about the Olympics and break dancing, where I was like, oh my God. But like, to me, when I think of people that are meant to be taken seriously, that are like in these sort of like high elevated positions, when I see them dancing, it's just comical because it's like, oh, you're a person and you have no rhythm. That's
right.
It's just funny. So
I think it's around the same time when Trent Lott and 3 other senators who were part of a kind of barbershop quartet sang at the Republican National Convention. And that was going around recently too. And there is something about like, you know, these are slickly packaged for television by the 1990s, but they are still, I don't know, they're just like a little less sleek than what we expect today. And I think that's part of the reason why it kind of catches on, because you're like, this would not happen today.
But yes, but I think I disagree a little bit in that this moment, there are lots of like shaggy, awkward, corny moments that are like about the people in the room, and they don't really have self-awareness. But, you know, I had my barbershop. There was, I didn't put it in our list because I couldn't really verify it, but there was some reporting about one of Nixon's daughters singing at one of the conventions and it being pretty cheesy and cringy. And, you know, it's like, yeah, my daughter, she sings, she's inquired. Like, let's put her on stage. But the Macarena thing, I think, is more than that. It is very much trying to kind of tap into larger culture. I think this is probably worth pointing out. It's just sort of how ubiquitous the Macarena is as a cultural force at that moment. And so, obviously, yes, it's corny, but I think it also plays particularly corny because it was an attempt to tap into, I don't know what. And that's part of the question. Like, what exactly were Democrats trying to do by saying
levity, the coolness,
we're going to have everyone dance the Macarena? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, even the dance itself with the like, you know, like it's so much. There's like so much like movement and stuff. It's just hard to, I mean, listen, I'll take the Macarena over other dances, I suppose, but like, it'd be really wild to see like people twerking on stage or something. I'm like, okay, stop right there.
Exactly.
But it's wholesome. Anyway, your grandma.
It is
Macarena,
wholesome.
Yep. You know what I mean? Like,
and for people who didn't sort of live through the height of the Macarena, and one thing is the Macarena is still out there. It's a kind of incredible how ubiquitous it is. I can attest to the fact that 7-year-olds now learn how to do the Macarena. But you know, this is peak Macarena moment where everyone is doing the dance. It is just sort of saturated into the culture. And, you know, there are some commentators who try and overthink it. There were people who called it out at the time as a little cheesy. There were other people who were like, this is the Democratic Party projecting a young, hip, energetic, multicultural image. I mean, you know, the fact that Macarena is a Spanish language song, you know, is worth lingering on. It's worth pointing out. Is one of the earlier moments when sort of that when Spanish language music broke through in that way. So yeah, the Democrats, I think, were trying to do something here. Funnily enough, the person who I think comes off looking the best because he looks the worst is Al Gore, who, if you look at those videos, Hillary Clinton's trying to dance. She's caught up in the moment. Everyone else is trying to dance. It's not going well. And Al Gore is like super stiff. And he's basically, after the fact, says he was doing a kind of mocking of himself and his reputation as being stiff, and kind of trying to do the Al Gore version of the Macarena, which is basically
a Macarena.
A Macarena. There you go. And so maybe people didn't get that joke and were just like, "Oh, Al Gore, look at him, he doesn't know how to dance." But there was some self-awareness there, which I think is kind of the story of Al Gore in general. He's a lot more of a subtle thinker than people tend to realize. He was pigeonholed into. I want to use this as a chance to talk about one other thing, which is a favorite little pet thing that I like to watch in presidential campaigns and especially at conventions. But it is like the inevitable run of political parties using music that they don't have permission to use, and then artists being like, what are you doing? Like, please take my song out of your
actually pay me my money.
Or just like, I don't want to be affiliated with this, or don't use it. And frankly, it's happened a lot with Donald Trump lately. But it is like, sometimes I'll tune into a live stream of a Trump rally and I'll literally be like, all right, 2 weeks from now, there's going to be a letter from the person who wrote this song to the Trump campaign. Alanis Morissette is about, okay, Alanis Morissette, you're on the clock. Time to send a note to Donald Trump. But I don't know what happened with the Macarena. I'm sure that Los del Rio, I think is the name of the band. There wasn't a spat as far as we could tell. All right, final thing. Quiz for listeners. Maybe you know it. What song knocked Macarena off its incredibly long run at the top of the charts?
This is what year again? This is 96. Honestly, if I didn't have the answer in front of me, I would probably say something by MC Hammer. But maybe that's me thinking of like Too Legit to Quit or something like that.
Or by like Trish Yearwood, because that was a big like monster country album.
Yeah.
It is in fact No Diggity by Blackstreet.
Yes, No Diggity, No Debt.
Which that's honestly a little swing. Honestly, I'll take that shift from Macarena to No Diggity.
Man, that was a good one.
All right. Weird moment number 5. We were just talking about Al Gore and
returning characters.
Al Gore, poor Al Gore. Like this moment, I remember I watched this in real time and I was kind of like, wait, what? So Al Gore is at the convention. He's walking up on stage as the candidates do. And the first thing they typically do is like greet their spouse and give them a big, embrace, a hug, a peck on the lips, something like that. And as he goes into embrace Tipper, he like gives her a kiss, but wants to sort of like linger. And it's this awkward, like, he gives her like a 3-second kiss, which is just like, okay, that's enough. That's enough. Like it just, the whole thing about it was like, no, I don't think she wants this, bro. Like it just felt awkward. Their embrace felt awkward. Everything about it was just too long. And we don't want to see Al Gore in that capacity. I feel like if he had just came up to his wife, given her a hug, quick little peck, made his way to the podium, okay, fine. No problem. But it was the awkward, lingering kiss that just SNL picked it up. Everyone picked it up. Commentators were like, what is happening?
Were you watching this live, Nikki?
I'm sure that I was, because we always watch the conventions at home. What I remember was how it played, less in the like Saturday Night Live category, but more in like, Gore was having a challenging time beating the charges that he was really stiff, as we just talked about, right? Like he was one of those people who didn't seem to emote a ton, who didn't necessarily always seem comfortable in his own skin. And there were 2 kind of problems with the kiss. One, it was still kind of stiff, the kiss. And so he's not beating the charges there, but also it felt like it was done to beat the charges.
Oh, it was so calculated.
So it doesn't feel authentic. No. And that was going to be a problem for him in the campaign, right? Like that he just didn't read as somebody who had passions.
But I also felt like coming off the heels of Clinton, I felt like he was trying to be like, see, I love my wife. Like that kind of thing.
Oh, interesting.
And it just didn't read that way.
Right. There are other ways for them to show that they are normal, happy couple. And this just did not play into it. Didn't feel natural, and I think it just felt like an attempt to. But so to Zapruder this moment a little bit. When you say 3 seconds, Kelly, it's not 1, 2, 3. It's like a full Mississippi. It's like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. They're still kissing Mississippi. It was like long, and there was a little bit of the kiss, and then a sort of like forced back lean.
Yes, he dipped her.
Second dip kiss.
I feel like she doesn't want this,
and
bro.
That I think is the main thing that I think caught for me and for other people was like, wait a minute, did they not? I almost wanted them to be on the same page. It doesn't feel like they're on the same page. She looks a little like she's doing the little like arm like what's happening to me thing. And so yes, it just all does not work well at all. And
cringe, ultimate cringe.
But also I think like as we have seen recently as well, when you're trying to prove you're normal, that is really, really, really tough to do. And you really often end up just underscoring how not normal you are when you're like, hi, I'm kissing my wife.
And I mean, I think, it's the big lesson of politics is what voters want is just authenticity. And that's a very inscrutable thing. But mostly, you can be a weirdo as long as you're sort of comfortable in your own weirdness.
Right.
As long as it feels authentic. If he gave her a high five, but that was true to them, then okay. But no.
So SNL does a parody of this, as you say. Gore goes on the Late Show maybe a week or so later, and they play Prince's Kiss as he's coming onto the set. That's nice. There is a sort of sad coda here that 10 years later, the Gores do separate. Tipper Gore and Al Gore do separate. I don't know what was going on there, but anyway.
I don't think it was the kiss. I think
it
was
the kiss might have been more of a symptom.
10 years later, all right. Let's move on to weird moment number 6.
Let's call this weird moments. And again, very much a product of the hyper regulated television campaigns of the modern era. And that is these failed balloon drops. The balloon drop with all the confetti is supposed to be like the big moment, the fireworks show at the end of the campaign, the thing that everybody is looking forward to. And it doesn't always work. One that really sticks out is in 2004 when John Kerry was finishing up his convention and they're trying to get the balloons to drop. And all you hear over CNN, if you're watching this on cable news, is the guy going, drop the balloons, drop the balloons. Hey, the balloons aren't dropping. Nope, faster, more balloons, faster, more balloons. And it's supposed to be this like big celebratory moment. And instead it just reads as both manufactured and a failure. And I think that one sticks around, as does a failed balloon drop in 1980 when Carter was running for re-election. Again, a campaign that was going to fail disastrously. And so when the balloon drop doesn't work, people look back at that and say, hey,
it was an omen. It was a bad omen. I mean, the crazy thing about this is that had not you heard the sort of broadcaster saying like, go balloons, drop the balloons.
Totally.
Like no one would have known that this was supposed to happen. And it just would have been this celebratory, like cheering and sort of like credits roll kind of moment. But I don't know, part of me is like, how hard is it to drop balloons? Like, don't you just pull a string and they fall out? Like, what is good?
All of the stage managers in the audience are like, look at Kelly denigrating my craft.
Just saying, it can't be rocket science. Like, just drop the balloons. There's got to be netting. You cut the netting and they go. Is that not how it works?
There's a lot of moving parts at these things. And sometimes I'm more surprised that they go off with,
as well as they do.
But again, when you're in the room, you see a lot of the seams in a way that when you're on TV, it gets covered. And so, yes, but the balloon drop is supposed to be the big reveal. It is fun when you're standing there, you're covered in balloons. And I guess we should also give a shout out to 2016 as not a failed balloon drop, but potentially a overly successful balloon drop.
Over exuberant balloon drop. I remember very well because it wasn't just like your regular sized balloons, but they had these enormous ones as well. And there's Bill Clinton standing up on stage next to Hillary Clinton and like kicking the balloons like a little kid. It was Yeah, I mean, it maybe like the Clinton campaign itself, a little over celebratory.
Yeah. The whole thing about what happened to the balloons that were there the election night at the Javits Center. There's like a great story about where they ended up when they didn't get dropped when she lost. But yes, at the 2016 convention in Philadelphia, I was in the room. Just enormous number of balloons. Like they just kept falling, and people were just like knee deep in balloons by the end, you know.
Kind of awesome.
And they're like, enough.
But it also led to another gif, I think, of like Clinton looking like she was like, people were like, is this the first time she's ever seen balloons? Like she's really excited right now. But yeah, so similar to the Macarena, just a little too excited.
A little too much.
Moment. But you know, hey, it is fun. And she had just been nominated for president. So there you go.
Yeah.
All right. Our final weird moment number 7. And I think listeners who know their weird convention political history have been saying, are they going to get to this? Are they going to get to this? Are they going to get to this? Yes, folks, we are going to get to 2012 with Clint Eastwood addressing an empty chair that, well, let me identify part of the problem here. I don't think people really realize that he was in theory talking to a empty chair that was supposed to have Barack Obama sitting on it. And he was supposed to be critiquing, but he just kind of got out there and started talking on an empty chair, and all context was lost. The context clues were not being offered really, and it was one of the most bizarre, surreal convention moments ever. And so for 12 minutes, he has this conversation.
Worse than the 3-second kids.
Oh yeah,
it just went on and on and on.
Yep. And you know, he pretends that it's talking back to him, and he gets insulted, and he pretends that it's swearing at him. It is, you know, supposed to be Barack Obama sitting in that chair, and he's offering a critique of the guy and having a conversation with an imaginary Barack Obama sitting in the chair.
Whose idea was this?
It was his idea.
Yes.
He was supposed to come on. So this happened on the closing night of the convention, and Romney is coming on after him.
Real primetime stuff.
And so he is supposed to be like the big Hollywood star who introduces Romney, maybe says a few words about guns because of his connection to the NRA. And he comes out and he brings out this chair, and he starts to just go unscripted. So the campaign did not know what he was going to say. They did not vet his speech, which is wild when you think about how second by second of those primetime parts of the convention are planned.
Yes.
And once it starts, there's nothing they can do. They don't have a shepherd's hook back there to sort of like drag him off the stage.
Right.
They just have to wait until it ends. And the vibe is so bad.
Yep.
When he leaves the stage, like that's your opener, Mitt Romney.
I mean, 12 minutes is so
long.
This is the ultimate cringe. I have to say the ultimate, because I do remember listening to him speak, and he he tells the chair to shut up. Like, it's like, what? Like, it was just so, there was no way to get around how awkward and how bad that was. And then people were like, is there something wrong with him? Does he have is this dementia? Is this he's having a mental breakdown? Like, it's bad.
Well, even as, I mean, there's a version of it where could be sort of strange but effective if he just comes out and he's like, here's Barack Obama, and here I don't know, Barack Obama won't take a meeting with me, but here are all the things I want to say to Barack Obama, and it's a nice, tight, punchy, whatever. But instead, it's this awkward, imagined conversation where he's not really saying what Obama says back to him, so we have to kind of pick up on it, and it's like it's very stilted and weird. And again, 12 minutes in prime time. I mean, that is valuable real estate. And it was very, very, very.
Yeah, that could have been
strange.
30 seconds.
Yeah. A nice little moment from this year was, and this kind of went around, and again, it was not during prime time, and I think it was emblematic of like, people don't realize how weird conventions actually are. But Jim Justice at the Republican convention this year had his dog sitting on a chair next to him during the speech. And like, people were, there was this meme going around where it's like this close-up shot of Jim Justice, and he's saying the most like apocalyptic things about the state of America and what Joe Biden, I guess at that point, is going to do to this country, and like, we're on the brink of collapse, we're about to become a Soviet, failed state, and then it cuts this wide shot, and there's just this bulldog sitting on a chair next to him. It's like, what is going on here? But again, to me, that kind of weird stuff happens a lot during the day.
Yeah.
Again, the Eastwood thing happening in primetime was very strange.
Mm-hmm.
The lack of vetting, Nikki, made me realize that we missed a big one, and we should do a proper full episode on this. Gosh, I don't know when we could sneak it in, but we did miss the Melania plagiarism.
Oh,
Thing,
yes.
which is
All right.
just kind of stunning. And just wrapped up
Classic.
in the craziness
Classic.
of 2016. Look,
The
I'm
moment
sure,
she said, "Your word is your bond,"
Oh
I was
my
like, "What?"
Where have I heard that
Unreal.
before?
So I guess that's a good way to end it, is by saying to listeners, I'm sure we missed many other weird convention moments. So go ahead and
Yes.
let us know what we missed, and maybe we'll do proper full episodes on it in the future. And if anything, we've hopefully left you with the notion that, yes, as grave as this political moment is, these are truly strange events. And so I think, we're recording this ahead of the DNC this year, but we'll see how it plays out. But I think there's going to be a lot of weird stuff going on inside and outside of the arena.
Is it me? But does it make the conventions a little bit more exciting now, because we do have social media and we do have GIFs and memes and these things that keep the joke going, so to speak. And so it just, I feel like sometimes I'm checking social media just to see what GIFs and memes are going to pop up.
It goes back to the one you talked about, 1948, the first televised one. That was where it started to bridge that divide between what's happening in the arena and the rest of the world. And now we just have more and more access to it. And you got a sort of sense of the weirdness. And I'm sure that, and there's also a feedback loop too, right? Between now that people are watching at home, they're reacting, and then people in the arena are seeing that reaction and are adjusting. So yes, it's a very interesting little ecosystem. I'm glad we were able to kick off Conventions Week with this tour through the weird moments, and then we will run some other episodes about conventions this week as the DNC plays out. But that brings us to the end of the episode. This was really fun. Thanks to everyone who was watching on YouTube. If you weren't watching this and you were just listening, you want to watch it again, go back and watch it. Why not? Here we are. Nicole Heimer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kelly Carter Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.